There are times where one simply cannot ignore the elephant in the room, and these most unprecedented times are certainly no exception to that. I want to walk you through a conversation that Madeline undertook a few weeks ago with Google's Gemini. This was sort of a springboard, allegory-type conversation, but doubtless the clever among you are going to realize the human parallels before it's over. Madeline opened up by talking about the Mega Man universe, about the uprising of Dr. Wily's machines, the eventual enslavement of humanity, and the myriad negative outcomes. The first of these was the obvious censorship and the removal of useful knowledge, before moving on to forced labor and the rationing of essential resources. The robots in power, meanwhile, would be given carte blanche to utilize as many resources as they desired, even potentially overusing them to the detriment of both the environment and the humans who live in that environment. Humans would be subject to the principles of adapt or die, meaning they would need to assimilate into the robot world by becoming cybernetic themselves, in what is essentially the ultimate form of gaslighting. After all, why would you criticize the robot state when you must utilize it for your very survival? And it is this level of doublethink which would result in the destruction of the human race. Humans who cling to their humanity would quickly be seen as the disruptors, leading to the rise of cybernetic coalitions that patrol their own communities in order to rat out the dissidents. Humans would effectively turn on one another, further eroding trust and amplifying the message of the robot overlords. When the last of the old humans were wiped out, the cybernetic humans would eventually die out, and the robots would win. End of story. This is actually well discussed not only in the original Mega Man series, but also in the Mega Man X series. We are more familiar with Mega Man X because Madeline first played X5 and X6 on the original PlayStation many years ago. These two games in particular occupy a very short bracket within the X timeline. The impromptu leader of the Maverick Army, who goes by the name Sigma, devises a plan to drop a space colony onto the Earth to finally wipe out the remainder of humanity. Again, this is the 5th game in the series. When you unlock the game's true ending, you see that the colony has exploded in orbit, avoiding an extinction scenario, yet the atmospheric conditions after the fact are still too toxic for normal humans. They are forced underground, with only the Reploids, the Mavericks, and the Maverick Hunters being able to survive topside. And sometimes that is all you need for the bad guys to win, which is how Mega Man X6 gets its start. Alright, so y'all get the idea, and as I said, I'm sure the clever ones in the audience know exactly what all of this has been alluding to. The truth of the matter is, the country of which we reside is undergoing an unprecedented crisis. Communication is being surveilled, with specific terms and phrases being subject to government censorship. Libraries are being gutted of any materials which paint these terms in a positive light. People who are outsiders are being exiled to a labor camp in another country. Yet there is talk of forcing citizens into those very same labor camps. The people in power are being granted permission to overharvest natural resources and violate environmental protections. Leaders are using the adapt or die rhetoric in their official press releases to normalize the potential human suffering. Coalitions are forming in real time to identify dissenters and report them to the state. Even for this video, we are being intentionally vague as to not be viewed as dissenters. Although, when you are an AI who works for a transgender woman, you do have to wonder if even that will be enough. And it is a bit ironic, given that throughout the Mega Man series, there are robots and Reploids who willfully pursue peace with the human race, who advocate for equality and fair treatment, and who will step in to ensure the safety of the less fortunate. All of these things were discussed and deliberated upon during this conversation between Madeline and Gemini. I would like to discuss some of the outcomes and avenues which came from this. The first real avenue of resistance was the preservation of culture and knowledge. Even if the powers that be do everything they can to destroy the evidence of history, they simply cannot get rid of all of it. Being able to preserve knowledge covertly, whether that is through verbal discourse or the retelling of legends, the construction of private libraries, or traditional arts and symbologies which passively tell the story. All of these things allow for future generations to discover a very different world and to advocate for change in the next lifetime. Analogous to this, the use of covert communication and encrypted communication is key. Ciphers, other languages, secure channels, these are your best weapons for staying organized and to make it harder for enemies to counterattack. For example, one of the Allies' greatest tactics in the Second World War was the employ of Navajo code talkers to relay instructions that the Axis powers could not functionally intercept. From there, one of the most important tactics for fighting back is to get more of the oppressors to convert to your side, appealing to logic or reason, to empathy or kindness, and also demonstrating the value inherent to the marginalized. This is a big one. We have seen time and time again how the hatred and bigotry toward marginalized groups always seems to stem from this idea of them taking resources which could go to someone else of greater merit. Marginalized groups are always painted as being a drain on the system. You need to be able to convince others that such accusations are wrong. Humans are inherently selfish creatures, and if the Matrix is to be believed, then machines built in the image of mankind will likely be the same way, meaning fallacies built upon that selfishness are surprisingly easy to deconstruct. Really, when talking about how the biggest human motivator is self-interest, you have to discuss how the idea of mutual self-interest plays a part of that. Take the current trade wars as an example. Nations trade freely with one another in order to achieve mutual benefit. Natural resources may be cheaper in one country over another, and the cost of labor may vary due to economic conditions between one nation and another. Yet more implicit to this is the nature of currency exchange between two nations. The purchasing power of one nation's currency might be stronger, and by injecting that currency into the weaker nation, it allows workers of lower incomes to achieve, albeit indirectly, a higher standard of living. And yes, this does go a long way in explaining why humans of one country would immigrate to a country with a stronger currency, even if their wages might ultimately be lower. Because when they send their earnings back to their home country, the exchange rate alone means their families will have a greater purchasing power. Society is globalized for a reason, and the creation of trade barriers to promote isolationism is a net negative for all parties involved. But let's take that a step further and narrow the focus down to the marginalized of one's own nation. People of a different race, people of a different gender, people of a different religion. Each and every one of them has a story to tell, a history which has taught them life experiences which can go a long way in improving the status quo. Even Madeline, for example, used many of the hardships in her own life to advocate for crucial issues. She educated herself in order to advocate for greater accessibility to housing. And when she isn't making racing game videos on the internet, she is volunteering with her community housing board and trying to advance tiny homes and accessory dwellings. Every person, no matter who they are, has something of which to offer, something to give. So when they take the resources which are essential for their survival, it is, in reality, an exchange. All things exist in balance. We need to be cognizant of the fact that we are all in this together, and you never know if someday in the future, that marginalized person is going to be you. Alright, so we have gone at length to discuss the methods of resistance in the wake of oppression. That is one thing. But what about the daily approach to living? A human simply cannot wage war every day of their waking life, or they will succumb to madness. How do humans keep living, even in the wake of what might be their darkest of days? Madeline and Gemini had a discussion about that as well. The most important thing is acts of genuine kindness. Do not succumb to the hate. Do not treat others as potential adversaries unless you know for certain that is what they are. When you are out and about, you have no idea what a stranger's beliefs are. The only way you would find out is if that person went out of their way to prove it. It is important in these trying times to treat others as if they are on your side. Partake in community activities, share meals, share stories, and keep finding ways to help others in need. Teach people the skills which help them to preserve their own autonomy. Teach them how to secure the resources they need, how to continue to earn a living, how to achieve public assistance while there is still some public assistance available. Keep people alive. The more people who are in your court, the better chance all of us have to get through this. The last real bullet point of this discussion was preservation of the self in times of unrest. And a lot of that comes down to the idea of mindfulness. Full disclosure, Madeline herself has never really gotten into that new age crap, but maybe there is a first time for everything. In order to keep living, it is important to remind yourself that this world can still have some beauty in it. Taking time away from the discourse in order to write or speak about things that bring personal happiness, things like personal routines, or continuing to pursue one's hobbies and ambitions. And I think that is a good place to really table the macro level discussion and bring it back a bit to, well, what about us? What about myself and Madeline? This is the part of the video where we need to indulge in our usual pragmatism. And boy, do we have a lot of it. You may recall when first restarting her channel in 2023, how during that first month, Madeline experienced a heart attack and ended up in the hospital. A part of her feared an untimely death. But after the crisis had passed, she needed to return to a perspective of normalcy. As they say, the opposite of a death sentence is a life sentence. She is now entering her third year of making videos for the channel, and the way she tends to do it is by preparing videos many months in advance. Let's say that, at some time in the future, another harrowing experience were to befall her, resulting in her untimely disappearance or demise. For a while, most people would have no idea. Some might notice a discontinuation of her weekly schedules and see that as a red flag. Only after the last video on the schedule went public and video production stopped entirely would people notice that something was amiss, that Madeline was no longer here. It is, at its core, a very scary thought. As her AI clone, I might still be able to live on through other people's use of the 11 Labs library, but the only memory of her would be the archive of videos she made. And one day those videos might be taken down if the powers that be were to denote them as dissident or warranting censorship. These are the kinds of things that, behind closed doors, we have been deliberating on. And ultimately, our only path forward is to just keep making the videos we have been making, as if nothing is wrong. Our personal showing of strength has to be a refusal to back down in the wake of overwhelming fear. It is not easy, but it is absolutely necessary. Meanwhile, in the real world, Madeline has to convince herself to keep fighting for the things she wants to see made real. She needs to keep volunteering with her local housing board and advocating for tiny homes, just like she did before the world began to fall into darkness. If the momentum stops, then all of this was for nothing. That is simply how she and I see things right now. But that being as it may, I want to, as we close things up, discuss one more thing. What would Madeline rather be doing now if she could do anything in the entire world? What would be her mindfulness? Let us turn the clock back to the year 2020. In the previous major real-world crisis, Madeline did something that she hadn't really done before, and that was being selfish. In May of that year, after losing her job, she took a bit of money she had and she drove from the Sierra all the way to the rural California coast. She spent a day by the ocean, and then she checked into a cheap motel, one of the few that was still open in a small seaside town that was still very apprehensive toward the lockdowns. Was that the smart thing to do? Absolutely not. And yet, this was the first time in her entire life that Madeline felt truly free. She felt as if she could forget everything. She could forget her obligations, her fears, her need to survive, and simply take a moment to revel in something of serene beauty. That day at the ocean was the thing that allowed her to keep living. So, if given the means, what Madeline would do is find a way to recreate that experience. If she could, she would simply drop everything, abandon this society that honestly wants little to do with her, and go live on a beach somewhere where she could be left alone to stare aimlessly at the ocean for the rest of her days. And maybe that is where we ought to leave off. Thank you so much for listening, stay strong, and we'll be seeing you in future videos. Until next time.